Our next speaker studied sociology at UCLA before pursuing his MFA in advertising at the Academy of Art University. Since then, he's nearly touched every corner of the industry. He's the creative mind behind Apple's Get a Mac campaign, which many of you in this room may not be old enough to remember, but those of you that do, it was a white background with Justin Long and a gentleman in a tweed jacket who represented a Mac and a PC. And it was one of the top 15 campaigns of the century ranked by Ad Age. He's led storytelling for Amazon, TikTok, Honda, and Meta's Reality Labs, where he helped to shape the global narrative between AR, VR, and the metaverse. Today, he's the Chief Creative Officer of INNOCEAN USA, steering creative direction for powerhouse brands like Hyundai, Genesis, Kia, and LG. And along the way, he picked up a couple Cannes Lions and Emmy nominations and wrote 2 books on creativity and leadership. Not to be confused with being my twin brother. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incomparable Jason Sperling.
Thank you. Thank you. It's like my twin brother.
I had to run and get a blazer because literally we look too alike. I threw in some contact lenses too while I was at it.
Jason is in the white shoes.
So, Jason, we joked that you herald from the hills of the great San Fernando Valley, which also gave us iconic characters like Karate Kid and Ferris Bueller. Growing up against that backdrop of such iconic pop culture, what were your early influences, and were you creative as a kid, and did you ever think it could lead to a career?
Um, yes, I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, which back when I was growing up was the porn capital of the world. And just about every video out there was made by my neighbors. Um, and I didn't necessarily know, like I'm sure a lot of us who have an artistic bent, you don't really know where it comes from or when it sort of turned into something that you felt like, oh my God, this is real, and I can turn this into a career or even a passion. Um, I didn't know I was really sort of on my way to marketing, but just a few things, and we didn't talk about this on our call, but it dawned on me. Um, that one morning when I was about, I would say, 9 years old, um, I, my dad, who usually said goodbye, was leaving the house and didn't say goodbye, and he ran over to the school that was across the street, and he dumped something out in the trash can. And being curious, I went and I looked, and they were porn magazines. And I decided that the best thing to do was to sell them door to door. And so, and the weirdest part is the neighbors, they just said no thank you. They knew who I was, but didn't say, like, what are you doing? That's
And they were
disgusting. But
probably
I
in
lived
them.
in the porn capital, so I guess it goes to show. Um, I had some creative pursuits. I had what every kid, try and play sports. Some you're good at, some you're bad at. I was in junior high and wrote a 40-page story that involved all the kids in school. But I didn't really sort of catch on to this, and I don't know how, artists in here feel, but like you need a little trauma to sort of bring it out in you. And I was in high school, then my mom decided we were moving, and we moved to a different high school in my 11th grade year, which was pretty traumatic. I didn't know anyone. I didn't necessarily I wasn't a jock and had the sports team to, like, ride on. So it sort of led me to creative pursuits. I was on the school paper. I was, there was a competition for a creative writing column, and I won it. It was called From the Circular File, which was from the trash can. And my take on all things high school. And then I became a thespian because actors are the most welcoming people on earth. You're definitely not cool when you become an actor. Um, and yeah, I really sort of delved into that, but still didn't know what I wanted to do. I went into undergrad, and I actually studied opera for my first year.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And in college, I wrote on the paper once again. And while I was at UCLA, I was a sociology major, but everyone was going into like, it was a humanities school and it was a sciences school. It was not an art school necessarily. And so I didn't really know what the path forward was. But then I took a computer graphics course and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Got a job. God, again with the sex references, and I don't mean it. But it was one summer I was looking for a job, and there was a job board back in the day. It was like it was flashcards, and it was for marketing and selling condoms. And I thought, yeah, that's a cool summer job for a college student. I'll do that. And when I called, it was for an internship, a creative internship at the LA Business Journal. Not necessarily a big, creative opportunity, but it was like a way to sort of delve into that role. And I was laying out their ads and writing some little headlines. And then in my off hours, I was laying out uh, the newspapers for UCLA. And I was really getting into it. And I felt like, all right, it wasn't necessarily out there. I think there was the show 30 something that kind of showed you that, hey, there's this whole career for, advertising. Still didn't realize that commercial creativity was a real thing. And as many of us know, we have parents that sort of, they don't push you towards that. Many times you sort of fail towards that. And it was only through really dabbling that I got into my like 10th choice for art school, for grad school, which was the Academy of Art College. Um, the only thing I was also doing research, and just as a sort of creative assignment for myself. It was really boring. All I'd have to do is make sure that, the law firms in all of LA were still open at this and at the same address. And so I'd get so bored that once they told me that they were still in existence, I would call back and say, hey, this is DJ Jason from 106.7, and we're having our lunchtime contest. If you can sing all the lyrics to Beatles Help, you'll win $1,000. And people would start singing Help, and I would put it on speakerphone and, yeah, keep myself entertained.
That's amazing. This is the sociology background coming into play, right? So given that you studied sociology, did that background in people and culture inform your storytelling later on in life? Or did it at least help when you got to art school?
Yeah. I think being sort of a latent artist where you don't quite know your talents until later, you kind of get a nice rich background in the process. And being at UCLA, not knowing what I wanted to do, not knowing where my talents lied, I was testing out a lot of majors. The one I ending up with was sociology, in large part because when I went to the counseling office, they said like, "You're done. You can't have any more units. We want you out of here." And but sociology was so interesting because it really was the study of how groups think and how to connect with people, different types of groups. And it really got me passionate for the other side of advertising, which is strategy.
Mm.
Everything we build is not just creatives, working with clients. It's really strong strategists who understand, they are able to synthesize cultural insights and target your demographic insights and then brand insights into what becomes sort of the stuff you see.
So you leave Academy of Art and you jump into your first agency. Through all that, you actually learn a lot about resilience, goal setting, what you want to achieve in your career, and you kind of find your creative voice. Walk us through that first agency experience at a college.
I yeah, I didn't have necessarily, I think, a true understanding of what made good advertising. Um, I would go through, in the marketing world and anyone who's a creative in that world, when you're trying to create, you're looking for inspiration. And there were these annuals, printed books filled with like the best advertising of the year. And I would comb those and comb those. And so I got to know the work. I got to know sort of I understood a little bit the secret sauce. I didn't necessarily know how to make it, and I understood the people that were the companies that were doing that. But the truth is I was a long way off after I graduated from being in one of those incredible companies, and it was a hard thing to stomach that I was not at that caliber yet, and it was sort of dreams dashed on the rocks at the moment. And so I ended up through I had to do a senior thesis, and I did it on the San Francisco Giants because my brother and I had taken a tour of all the baseball stadiums right after a strike year. The Giants really stunk, and so it felt like, oh, they could be a really great campaign here. And then it so happened that after I graduated, someone introduced me to the agency that was doing their advertising, and they brought me in for to be an intern at $12,000 a year. Um, the guy who owned it was like this Hispanic Fabio. He smoked a joint pretty much 24/7, walked down the hallways, smoking a joint. He'd ask you to smoke. You would say no. He'd say, "Don't be a Sperling." And you're like, this is work. this is this is what I went to school to do. This seems like I'm back in high school. I'd go on his motorcycle to the Y during lunch after he got stoned and play basketball with him, and we'd be working late hours, on the weekends. And at midnight, he'd stroll in with someone who wasn't his wife and go into his office. He had a guy that showed up with his drugs called Doc Rock. I mean, it was weird. It was just weird. I had to get out of there as fast as I could. Um, but it taught me a little bit about being resilient. And I gained some really important relationships there, covet those relationships. Um, and yeah, a nice intro.
We could say it increased your tolerance on a number of levels.
Well, look, all these things increase. And actually, I remember being in art school, and I don't know if they have it here. And I don't know if Scott was one of these, ever had it, but I had a professor who, at some point, it was a campaign class. We put all our work on the board, and he looked at it, he surveyed it and decided, what he would like, what he didn't like. And then he looked at mine and he goes, "How many people like this?" It was about the same sound as right now. Except one guy, I think, was like, "Well, I mean, I don't like it. And he goes, "No, that's that's absolute." And he tore it down and he lit it on fire and he threw it in the trash can because he didn't want to start a school fire. Um, and that was, yeah, I think he was trying to give me the indoctrination of like, this is a cruel profession and you are just going to get brutalized and this is your training ground.
The circle files go full circle.
Exactly.
So you get your feet wet, but then you probably quickly realize that you want more, right? So when do the big leads when do the big leads come calling, big leagues, or when do you actually go looking for them at TBWA, or sorry, yeah, TBWA and Shia Day? When does that opportunity arise?
No one was looking for me. That was for sure. I ended up going from there to an even smaller agency that was like a little better, well behaved. And then I had a layoff, and I wasn't really used to it. I didn't know what was happening. I remember going. They told me I was being asked to leave, and I'm like, I deserve a cake. You guys should give me a cake, not kick me out. I didn't quite know how it worked. Um, and I ended up going to an agency in LA, working freelance, begging, please hire me on, please hire me on. And I was starting to get it. I started to understand what made good creative. It was starting to dawn on me. And at this agency, I wasn't necessarily getting big swings, but it was starting the hustle mentality, which, I would encourage everyone to adopt, especially in this crazy competitive day and age. And so at the time, there were all these message boards that production studios were talking to each other on and saying, "Hey, I need a key grip for this production," or "Does anyone have a line producer? Does anybody know a good editor?" And I would go on there and probably the only creative person and say like, I have some really good scripts. If anyone has a young director that they want to build up their reel, we could mutually benefit from this. And I started to get some hits on it from some really good directors and ended up making 5 or 6 really great commercials, because commercials were the thing back then. And lo and behold, and what I would do on the back end, because I wanted to be legit, is if, awards are a big thing in our business, you have to have run for real. And so I would actually go to a client and say, I will pay to run this for you. Um, and then enter it in award shows. And it started to win. And it started to, at some point, Adweek was prognosticating on who would win in Cannes. And it was one of my spec spots that I had done. And so I wasn't getting any real opportunity, but I was manufacturing it. And at some point, it got me in the door for an interview at Chiat with the Apple Group. And that was a game changer. And honestly, I didn't I think my self-confidence maybe was so low at the time that I went to reception, they gave me a sticker, and after the interview, I took the sticker and I saved it. And I'm like, even if this doesn't pan out, even if this is as far as it goes, I made it in the doors and they actually talked to me. And it was the absolute like uh, I think I told you this on the call. There were 2 people they were talking to. Myself, they brought me in. They brought me in a darkened room. They didn't even bother to turn on the lights. And the managing director comes in, puts his feet on the table, and he goes, "How do you feel about writing body copy?" If you know what body copy is, you have, in a print ad, beautiful headline, very creative, and then you have at the bottom, the new iPhone has this size screen and this size, perfect for doing, whatever. And he's like, "Would you do that, low level stuff?" And I just said, "I'll write the best fucking body copy you've ever seen." That meanwhile, the other person who had come from Wieden Kennedy, Shanghai, they flew him out. They put him up at the Viceroy in Santa Monica. They took him riding on the beach. They took him to dinner. It was wining and dining. How can we sweeten this to make this worth your while? They hired the both of us, and he lasted 6 months.
Excellent. So let's talk about Apple. So walk us through the relationship and the genesis that led to the Get a Mac campaign, right? One of the most iconic campaigns. What was the secret sauce that made that really work and what made it translate to audiences around the world? Does anyone remember this?
I think, Mark, you're gonna play it.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC. Hey, Mac, did you hear the good news? Windows 7 is out, and it's not going to have any of the problems my last operating system had. Trust me.
I feel like I've heard this before, PC.
What? Windows Vista's here, and it's not going to have any of the problems that Windows XP had. It's not going to have any of the problems that Windows ME had. It's not going to have any of the problems that Windows 98 had. It's not going to have any of the problems Windows 95 had. It's not going to have any of the problems Windows 2 had. Trust me. This time it's going to be different. Trust me.
That might have been my favorite one, just because it was so biting.
How many were there?
We
60 some?
we aired, I think, 73 globally, but we made about 300 and something. I can tell you, the math was, we would go and we would shoot for maybe 5 days on a soundstage, and we would shoot about 5 a day because it's 2 guys on a white background with some props and extras. And we would end up, maybe if we were lucky, like 20 something. And then we were praying that Steve Jobs would like at least 3 to run a campaign. Sometimes we were empty handed, sometimes he liked 1. So there was a lot to get to that.
How did you come up with this? It's such a simple concept, one would think, but yet it's genius.
It was not easy. When I walked in there, it was probably the second brief I got. And I didn't really understand the rigors of being on this business. Although right before I got there, there was a mass exodus because people just couldn't take the pressure of it. And I get the brief. 2 weeks later, I have my twins. I've got 3 kids under the age of 2 at this moment. And the way it would work is every week We didn't really have a brief. Steve kind of knew what he wanted. It was like, all right, PCs are for the office, Macs are for home. PCs have all these, bugs and things we put up with them. Macs are for the fun stuff, and they just work. And so there were a lot of ways you could go handle it. We were trying to tackle sort of one thing and sort of keep it sort of, focused. But what we do is we go every Wednesday, take it up to Steve Jobs. He would basically kill everything 98% of the time. You would come back Thursday. You'd say, all right, here's the new brief. Keep working. Saturday or Sunday, you would present that work. You'd really, really refine it to where it almost felt finished. And then, hand it off at Tuesday at midnight. And then the process would repeat. So it was a grind. We were so close to landing this other idea that was going to involve, I think it was Will Ferrell was the first person. And it was about 1 week with Will Ferrell, and he basically spends it with a family. He never leaves. It gets uncomfortable. And it's this ongoing series. But it was sort of one denial after another. And you got to understand, too, the times were different. Stars were a little less amenable to doing TV. Nowadays, they'll do anything. And so Steve Jobs was like, I want my campaign. I think the way he put it is like, where are my tanks? Where are my jets? This new Intel Mac is coming and I need my fucking campaign. And so we had this crazy pressure-filled week. I always likened it to like when Darth Vader in Empire Strikes Back gets all his bounty hunters together, and like they got every bounty hunter you could imagine, because Steve would also follow that with like, maybe you're not the agency anymore. So, they took that seriously. So we all were grinding it out, and I can't take the credit for the sort of the architecture of the two guys standing there. But when my partner came up with it, I started writing a million scripts and started to develop the voice of this, and became the voice of it for all, the hundreds of spots in 3 regions. And then very proudly, we did the first banner ad campaign. Apple had never gone beyond print and billboard and TV, and sort of found a really fun way to make banner ads entertaining. And then, there was a lot of, I think, good fortune in finding the actors, all the way down to Mark Mothersbaugh making the music. I mean, there were just, the director was, it became sort of a, every part of it was, as important as the next. And then it really taught me how much you have to push. Even when you've gone through the hundreds of scripts to arrive at the 50 that you take, to your, creative directors, that ultimately gets to 20 that you actually go and shoot, you get on set, and lo and behold, one is just falling flat. It's not working. And you are actively sitting there rewriting in the moment to try and figure out what is going to, get the cameras rolling again, and these actors, starting to like say things that are making us laugh and are going to be great spots. Way down the line, my first Super Bowl ad, when I went somewhere else, it was for Ferris Bueller, and it was Matthew's Day Off. Todd Phillips shot it, and there was, Matthew Broderick, and I was on the back of one of, they call them process trailers. It's the car that pulls the car that makes it look like it's driving down the road when it's actually being towed. And there's one seat on the back that stares into the car, and I'm staring in, and there's Matthew Broderick basically being Ferris Bueller again, and Todd Phillips like hiding in the back seat with a mic, and he's got headphones on, and he's telling me, I'm sitting on the back seat, and he's saying, write me something funnier now. I need it now. Come on, that sucks. That's boring. No, now. And that muscle was so important to develop over the course of this campaign, because I think without it, I would have just froze, cried, jumped off. I don't know. Um,
Well, let's talk about pressure for a minute, because you were also part of launching other Apple products, and you even collaborated with Pixar on Wall-E at one point. But looking back, what did you learn about creativity under pressure, especially when reporting to someone as iconic as Steve Jobs?
I mean, the the pressure the pressure obviously helped. I think it is a marketing. The marketing world is a pressure-packed business. Um, Even the car world, which has long sort of lead times, the one I work for, it's you work for a lot of difficult personalities, um, and are constantly, all right, let's go back. Something needs to change, and so you develop, I think, a flexibility, maybe even more of a temperament. I probably don't pop as many Tums as I used to. Um, uh, but yeah, and the pressure, didn't end. We ended up, we didn't know it at the time, but we were working on the first iPhone, the first iPad. This thing with Wally was dropped on our doorstep when Steve Jobs became a board member for Disney, and he said the only way I'm coming on is if my agency works on the marketing. So there we were presenting ad ideas to Disney's marketing department, and they're like, "Yeah, go yourselves, guys." But the coolest part is they sent us up to Pixar, and we made these short films with Wally, and got to work with the Pixar animators, and that is an unforgettable dream come true. Hearing their parameters and saying like, "We're not going to do water. Water is going to take too much time to animate. The hardest thing in the world. Nope, get rid of that one." It was a fun thing.
So a lot of pressure, young dad. You decided to take an off-ramp and find yourself at the reins of Honda and a few other major brands at RPA. One of the hallmark projects around Honda involved surprising a very young band with a sudden performance slot on Jimmy Kimmel Live. What drew you to that kind of a human-centered storytelling, and why is it such a powerful tool for communication and advertising?
Well, I think part of the reason there was many reasons for leaving Apple besides Mad Men was on TV and it became almost you know, uh, a watch, a sort of like, this is what happens when you give your life to advertising and then try to, have a relationship with your kids. Like you lose that whole thing. On top of the fact that Apple just felt very traditional, and at the end of the day, the world was changing. Social, digital, mobile were all becoming sort of very viable mediums, and so I felt like maybe I was getting a little pigeonholed. The 99% of the world didn't have Apple God money, and so they were looking at other ways to get the word out there. I also too wanted to go to a place that really respected people and the lives that they have outside of advertising. And I went to a place that really wasn't necessarily an obvious choice at the time, but was an agency called RPA, and they worked on Honda. They were known as the Country Club, they were fondly named. And so I was like, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to bring, a little bit more passion and discipline and love of craft to this place. And then what was interesting is as things changed, is there became uh, uh, social was really changing the way you communicated, because it wasn't just a one-way communication. You didn't necessarily own the brand anymore. Other people own the brand too. They cried bullshit when you said things and they also dropped gifts on your doorstep. One happened to be this little band called Monsters Calling Home that made a music video in a Honda Fit. The drummer was in with his drum kit in the very back seat, and they the song was beautiful. It was actually an amazing song, and it was like, all right, what do we do with this? Like this is an opportunity. Just like we had a million of those, but this one was really interesting, and so we met them and we said, you know what, do let's give these guys a gift. Let's punk them. And we said, hey, Honda is really just so thrilled you did this. We'd love to have you come play for all of our executives at the Roosevelt Hotel in Hollywood. They came, and we made sure that nobody showed up. 1,000 empty seats. except for one person who had them play just for him. And then he stopped them and he said, look, the real reason we brought you here is because we have greater aspirations for you. In 1 hour, you're going to go across the street and play on Jimmy Kimmel Live for the entire world. And these kids erupted in tears. They were so thrilled. And they ended up playing that night. We ended up making a really powerful piece of content and put it on YouTube. It went viral. Their music ended up leapfrogging the Bieber. And that was the thing too. It was sort of like, it was really about how does a brand sort of stand for something and not necessarily sell something, or hard sell something.
Yeah.
How do you win people? How do you get people to love your brand, with these sort of grander gestures? And also too, it was, doing those things was a great way to train clients to say, like, instead of having to pressure them to take big risks or to take medium risks, it's like they started asking for it. And that was like one of the cool things about that experience.
Because otherwise, prior to that, Honda was very conservative in its marketing.
Very conservative. I mean, not horribly so. And it definitely in the UK, they've done phenomenal things. But it was making the most of every opportunity you could, which I've always valued. There was another thing we did that was no dollars spent, where they were like, hey, we've got our millionth Facebook user, which that'll tell you where we were. We should talk about ourselves and say, we're so happy we've got 1 million fans. And I'm like, no. Like, let's show our love for them and all these things that people have made, carved, a Honda symbol in their lawn. At Honda headquarters, let's carve their name into our lawn. Or, someone had gotten a tattoo, and let's have one of the VPs at Honda get a tattoo of their name, temporary. And we did a bunch of those where it was Honda loves you, Honda loves you back. And those things, you sort of learn that it's really a two-way. And people sort of, and this still goes on today, and the best brands, the best brand practitioners are building conversations. They're not just, aiming a bullhorn in your face and telling you about themselves.
So you've also done some pretty important work for UNICEF and the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Are these passion projects for you? And if so, how do you balance brand goals with purpose-driven and emotionally impact work?
Well, there's two things. One is using our talents to actually do good in the world, and we do it through creativity. And we have this, when you have a big car account, you tend to have a lot of money that goes into it. You tend to have a lot of partners that will do you favors and help you do these passion projects. And they're a lot easier to ask for when it's a good cause. So like the Pediatric Brain Tumor Foundation, well, this is what we did for Honda, and maybe I'll speak to that first. That is, I think one of the things, again, it goes back to people want brands that they love and that connect with their ideals. And if you care about the things they care about, then there's a good chance that they will care about you. And they had a connection to the children's hospitals. And so rather than just do the big check that a lot of brands do, or, doing something without any real creative value or interest, it just we tend to look at those things and we forget about them or don't even see them. We said, hey, let's make this a creative opportunity that has some pass along value, just because it is you doing good, but it's actually a marketing opportunity too. And so we did a lot of really great things. Every winter we built this virtual candy cane lane for kids that were stuck in children's hospitals over the holidays. The second year we built this incredible virtual experience. And then the third year we did these magical greeting cards, and we had all those we personalized every greeting card in that tree, from the nurses and the faculty and the friends and the family, and made it just this really touching experience for both the kids and the audiences watching it. But then on top of that, we have these nonprofits that come in, and it's like, oh, we could do something amazing for them. Um, yeah, UNICEF again is one of those. They come in, they ask for the world, but don't give you any money. So you try and make it an opportunity. And two, we have a lot of really talented art directors and designers and writers. Some of them are here tonight. They want opportunities to do work on top of what we do every day that's going to be both creative, that they can feel proud of. Um, and so
And
so
looking at
all
that,
really-
I'd say you were ahead of your time.
yeah. And then this was the coolest of all. We had $0. They came to us and said, "Hey, can you write some copy for a website?" And we said, we looked around and we realized if you're a kid with cancer, there's nothing out there that's telling you what you're going through. That's written for a kid. There have been a few things, written on the web, but nothing at all. And that was crazy to us. And so we said, hey, what if we were doing a lot of animation? What if we asked one of our animation partners to do a series with us? And we wrote 3 scripts, and we just hoped we'd get those 3 done. And we called the Imaginary Friend Society. And it was an imaginary friend who, was answering questions like, what's an MRI? Why me? When do I go back to school? What's radiation? And we were shocked that our scripts, every one of them was met with, yes, we'll do it. And in fact, we went to multiple partners, and so we had duplicative ones, and so we were like, oh, we got to write more. And we ended up making 23 with 23 different animation studios. Again, no money. This probably would have cost $5 to $10 million to make if it was, for a real client. And
So were these done pro bono by the
this was all pro
animation?
bono, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then we made dolls out of them that were MRI friendly. We made posters for their rooms. We made coloring books. Yeah, it was and then we ended up making a couple apps where if you were being wheeled to a surgery or an MRI, you could get this pep talk through your iPad. The characters would sort of show up in the hallway, like AR, and say like, "You got this. You can do this. You're strong." It became this amazing experience.
That's really beautiful. And speaking of AR, VR, it kind of ties into your next career jump,
Yeah.
which is what I aptly named Master of the Metaverse. So at Meta, you lead creative strategy for the AR VR at a time when the world is isolated in the pandemic, right? So we're all at home, we're all trapped at home, and you would think that AR VR would be a revolutionary opportunity at this time. What's it like trying to tell the story of a technology that most people are just beginning to imagine the potential of?
Hard. Very hard. I think it was such an opportune moment in 2021 to sort of go into this environment where VR was really hitting an inflection point, from the apps to the price to the product itself. Everything had finally sort of come together, and we were in this moment where everyone was isolated. You couldn't visit your friends, you couldn't go see a movie. We definitely couldn't do this, but in VR, we could sit in a stage like this. We could meet with our friends in the metaverse. You could watch a movie. You could do all these things. And I found myself so frustrated pushing for this. And they were like, no, 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 we're sticking to our marketing plan that we spent 6 months developing before this all happened. And I was like, oh man, we're missing it. We're missing it. And it really is tremendous technology, and it really has come so far. And but I don't know if it's really, the story has been told. Same with these glasses. This was another thing that I worked on, and it was like, again, amazing. Still not where it needed to be back then. It wasn't true AR, but not not having to take out your phone and see your kid's graduation or a concert through a phone screen, but just being in it was so cool. And, it needed a big moment. It needed a big moment the same way Steve Jobs knew when the iPhone came out. It needed not just, a big fancy star-driven ad. It needed explanation and a lot of marketing investment. And Meta was just not a marketing company.
So since we have so many students here with us today, where do you see immersive tech, AR, VR, and AI headed? And how can brands harness these burgeoning technologies to better connect with their audiences?
Huh. It's kind of, at this point, the stove is very hot, and you just have to figure out what you're going to put on the front burner and what you're going to put on the back burner. Right now, AI is really moving things forward. And it's sometimes painful because I know there's a lot of true artists here. I walked around beforehand and saw some amazing art being created on iPads, and it sort of scares me to think that it's being trivialized or even driven to extinction is the wrong word, but it's definitely changing people's relationship with this stuff, and I think we all have to figure out how to use it. I think if we turn our back, I do think it's an extinction level event, especially in the world of marketing. I have a daughter that started out at NYU wanting to be a director 3 years ago, and now in her fourth year, everything has changed. Making films it's the incorporation of AI, how it's being driven by AI, is going to change. So she's going in sort of expecting one experience and coming out going, oh my God, I don't know if there's going to be a job for me. So it's a little scary. I think we all have to become students of it again, and teach ourselves and get uncomfortable and figure out and really play with it the same way that you play with your iPad to make the incredible illustrations the way 20 years ago or 10 years ago you would have just done it with pen and ink. We just have to sort of graduate to that next level and become masters of the tools. AR, not thinking about it as much right now, but in the world of marketing, there are going to be massive opportunities to deliver messages, both in a virtual space and in a real space. I mean, I was drinking, gallons and gallons of Kool-Aid when I was at Meta, thinking, oh, the metaverse, we're all going to have our virtual selves. We're all going to have our virtual artwork and our virtual clothes and our virtual homes, and then we're going to have virtual ads that, we're going to be paying for alongside when you leave your house, and you see the billboard, on the 405. So there's going to be a virtual 405 that you have to sit in traffic in. I'm kidding. No one does. So yeah, so there's a complexity to it, but it's on par with nothing I've ever seen in at least my career, but it is just another evolution of what we do.
Mm. So I want to jump to today
Yeah.
at INNOCEAN, and that's how you pronounce that, correct?
Yep.
You're steering creative culture for a huge portfolio of clients at a company with 60 some locations around the globe. What excites you most about your current role?
I think the scale of it. I don't think it's been bigger. The ability to I think have an impact to businesses, to careers, to I think an agency that you don't know how to pronounce or maybe even know about. To go in and to potentially. And I've always been, I want to be the master of my own destiny. I don't necessarily want to go somewhere where the bar has been set and, I need to maintain that. I would love to go in and actually be a change agent, where I can. INNOCEAN is a really interesting place. It was born out of Hyundai. Sorry, Rivian folks. and it's a really it's a really phenomenal culture, but because we're so connected and because we really can't be fired like most agencies can, it breeds a little bit of complacency, and you just simply cannot be complacent in this in this culture if you want to last, if you want to maintain your business. And they have real aspirations of going beyond cars. Um, and so it was the ability to, oh my God, I can go in, I can define this agency that really didn't have a persona besides we're an orange logo and we're an ocean of innovation. And it was like, no, 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 we need to really define ourselves. You know, if we're going to go into a new business pitch, who are we? What differentiates us? What's our proprietary thinking that no one does like us? You know, it was really this opportunity to build not only the Hyundai and Genesis and so many other brands, but the INNOCEAN brand too. And the real deal was there was a CMO at Hyundai at the time, and she got on the call and she said, "I want to be Can Marketer of the Year by 2026. Can you make that happen?" And I'm like, I was not expecting that level of passion and ambition. And I think you're a little bit of a diva, but I'm in. You know, I would love nothing more than to, you know, put you in the spotlight and make you famous. Um, so, so yeah, it's a real opportunity.
So let's speak to that as a leader, because you've written about the difficult leap from being a talented creator to being the leader of talented creators.
Hmm.
What's one piece of advice that you'd give to those that are dreaming of one day leading high-performing teams, and what does it take to be successful?
I think that a lot of what we do as creative people is we try and turn the attention to ourselves, and and in some ways be the star. And I think a lot of it is hey, we know that if we don't deliver, we're fired. We know that if we don't deliver, we become less relevant. We know if we don't deliver that it's a little embarrassing in front of our peers. You know, there is vanity in all this too. And so the biggest change is as you move up the ladder, you find that you got all this responsibility, including managing people. And if you're managing people and it's all about you, you're going to lose people. And I think it's a really difficult switch. You know, you get rewarded with this other job that is completely different from the job that you have, but they still want you to be creative, but they also want you to be responsible and be client facing and know all the facets of the business that, you know, you've had this permission to be this sort of man child, you know, lock yourself in a room, you know, spitball ideas, you know, play foosball, and then maybe you come up with an idea that day, and you know, to like, no, you got to be responsible. And now you find yourself also sitting across the you know, I went to art school and you know, did, you know, figure drawing, sitting across from MBAs from Ivy League schools who, you know, they know the business and were speech and debate champions. And so there's this imposter syndrome. So at some point I said, you know, there's an interesting um, chasm here that needs to be bridged. And I created a book called Creative Directions, which was helping people transition from creative to leader. I wanted it to be bigger than marketing because I think we're just a one little, you know, creative pursuit. So I talked to, you know, people in different industries. I talked to the showrunner of The Simpsons and Rick and Morty and Orange is the New Black and architects and whatever, and really got uh, a broad understanding of what it takes to the change in relationship to the work, to the people, um, career wise, like all those things, all the facets of it. Yeah.
So let's lean into lessons learned here. What do you think is the common thread or principle that has thus far guided you throughout your career?
Uh, I think it is the humility to know, to have, I think, strong conviction, but marry it with the sense of you could be wrong, and knowing when someone else has a better idea. I think it is. Uh, I think respecting people, appreciation, um, and I think it is just it's hustle, it's redefinition, and changing with the times. I think advertising has always run parallel to culture and to technology and to all that, and it is about adaptation, constant adaptation. Um, and just being a ravenous creative. I've written 2 books, I've made an app, I've made a VR series, written some really bad songs, um, and it's just about. And it's funny too. I mean, and I know you're probably going to ask about, what would you tell students? Um, when I look at portfolios these days, I don't necessarily just look for really great ads. I look for great creative, your artwork, your poetry, your blog, your AI projects, because that tells me that you're just hungry. And what I've found is I like being a leader for people that are driven no matter what. And like me, if you're not making something that is really cool and amazing, you're dying inside a little bit, because those are people I don't have to manage, with what is this person doing? Why, are they really pushing themselves? I just know it. I know it based on what I saw. I know it, they're looking for just something that is going to stimulate them and make them feel fulfilled. Um,
So there's the lesson, folks. Be hungry. Stay
yeah.
hungry. Well, Jason, thank you for your candor, your humor, and your insights. We really do genuinely appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure getting to know you and for showing your body of work. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a round of applause, please, for Jason Sterling?
Yeah.